Delighted to say that Malachy now joins me in the studio here in Westminster. Malachy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martin, and thanks to GB News for actually covering this issue in a way that the Irish media refuses to do. I mean, I haven't been on any mainstream TV or radio programme in the Irish Republic since November 2022 when this all kicked off.
Isn't that astonishing in itself? But just give people a flavour here on the mainland about the political earthquake that's happened in Ireland and what's been driving it. And give us a scale, if you can, for starters, of the scale of the immigration and the political backlash.
Well, if you take Ireland 15 to 20 years ago, the population was 3.5 million. Now it's 5.5 million. We haven't done as much as build one hospital or one school in that amount of time. We have a huge housing shortage, and this is where the real pressure comes. We've 14,000 people homeless in emergency accommodation. We've many more, tens of thousands of people who are still living in their mother's box rooms who can't move out of their homes and create a life for themselves. And that brought huge pressure on the system. But the political class, to give you a small example, when we proposed building modular homes to solve our indigenous housing problem, we were told, oh, you can't do that. Now, for Ukrainians and for asylum seekers, the government is now building modular homes, which they had costed at 220,000, which now, for some reason, which is not uncommon in Ireland, have cost 450,000 each. I mean, it seems that, you know, the government asks you to provide them with something, you send them a cost, and then they just double it or treble it. And in fact, we have you may have heard about this, there's a children's hospital being built in Dublin. Started off at less than 100 million, or it's now 2.5 billion. And even today we have heard that the contractor costed some work at 200,000, but put in a bill, and as far as I know, received it for 25 million. That just beggars belief. We have no infrastructure.
Let's talk, if we can, about the incident that brought a lot of this to attention, and there was a riot in Dublin last November. That's precipitated, of course, by a stabbing of some children and their teacher. Vehicles were set alight. And of course, the media, we can see pictures of that on our screen now. And of course, Malachy, the media, you'll be no surprise to you, leapt on this as evidence of a country gripped by the far right, by racism, by fascism even. We've heard all of this before. And yet, in Ireland, you seem to have a particularly hostile media. They seem to have completely fallen into line, Malachy, with the theory that immigration can only be a good thing. And as a consequence, you've seen hundreds and hundreds of peaceful protests before anything like this happened, Malachy, of people saying, enough is enough, Ireland is full, and yet nobody was listened to. Why not?
Well, I suppose the initial protest began in East Wall in November 22, almost a year before the particular incident and the riots in Parnell Street. There have been 250, according to the Garda's figures, 250 protests. Almost every one of them had been peaceful. The only time that there was trouble at them was, in fact, when the left attacked protests. And in fact, on one of our protests, they drove a car into a rally and injured a man. And, you know, if you look at what happened in Parnell Street in November 2023, almost a year ago, 3 young children were stabbed coming out of a creche or a play school. Their care worker, the girl collecting them, was stabbed. That girl will never be the same again. 2 of the children were thankfully recovered, mainly. The other child will never be the same again and will never have any quality of life. And the state's reaction to that, and the police visited some of the witnesses to that case, or that incident, and told them not to speak about it, because they would be then responsible for trouble and violence on the streets. I would say that the pent-up anger in Dublin City, which is a tinderbox at the best of times, if somebody comes along, whether they're a non-national or not, and stabs 3 kids walking down the street, there will be trouble. And I would suggest that any main city in England, Wales, Scotland, or anywhere else in Europe, the same reaction would happen.
We saw a similar reaction, of course, in Southport. Nobody is condoning riots or anything. I know you don't. You know, this is that you've had hundreds, as you say, of peaceful protests. Let's talk now, Malachy, about the political movement. There is a movement going on. You've been elected in Dublin. We've got big elections coming up. Can the island is full? Can the working class movement that you're spearheading get seats and affect actual real political change in Ireland?
Well, in the local elections in June, there was 3 of us elected to Dublin City Council of like mind. Before that, we didn't have anybody. We've probably a dozen councillors around the country, which is a huge breakthrough. We expect to have a general election either on the 7th or the 22nd of November. You know, and this government keeps talking about misinformation and lies. They're continually telling us we won't have an election till next year, and the dogs in the street know that there will be an election this year. We've beaten them by already in June by getting a number of councillors elected. We beat them in 2 referendums earlier in the year. We got rid of Leo Varadkar, who's gone because of the groundswell of opinion against immigration, and he's replaced with a total idiot, Simon Harrison. You think your politicians are bad? You want to come over and see ours. But the problem with the political class here is that they're all indoctrinated with woke liberalism. They've all come through the universities, with the exception of Harris, I have to say. And they all think the same and speak the same. And anybody who disagrees with the orthodoxy or with what the state says you're supposed to believe is somehow far right. And, you know, I'm saying that migration is leading to a problem with housing. I'm saying that since November 2022. The Taoiseach, the Prime Minister, is now saying the same thing. So is he far right? And we do know that the blue shorts, Fine Gael, were the original fascists, and the brown shorts in Ireland when they were created. But the other problem, I mean, you talk about the riots and law and order. There is no law and order in Dublin or in any major town and city in Ireland. We have a huge drugs crisis. Now we have drug addicts fighting amongst themselves. And we have a political class and we have NGOs, 33,000 NGOs, who are anything but an NGO. They get 6.5 billion to lecture us, and the government just follows what they say, just as the opposition. People did have some faith in Provisional Sinn Féin that they would be some kind of an opposition and that they were on track to go into government. That ship has now sailed, because the people see, particularly in working class communities, people see themselves as having been abandoned by the Provisionals. And indeed, one of their TDs last night on radio said that the people's mistrust of the government was because of the far right. Now, I would only hope that the far right, if they exist, would have that much influence. But the mistrust of the government is because of the government's continual lies and the government's continual rejection of the people's wishes.